Week 5 fantasy football is already here, and who is this week's Nick Chubb? I mean, the dude played out of his mind last week. That's the most Chubb I've seen on my social media timeline since that time I accidentally Googled... Never mind. What is going on, Headliner Nation? Jake Fantasy Headliners. Hopefully you're all doing well out there. Welcome back to the Draft.com studios, where today we're talking running backs, who we starting, who we sit in Week 5 fantasy football. Before we get into those matchups, though, once again, we're going to stay transparent here on this channel. How did we do in Week 4? Let's look at the numbers. So in Week 4, for the running back position, we basically killed it. I mean, we rated 50 players as a start or sit, got 38 of them correct for 76% accuracy. I'll take that any day of the week. Some of our hits, Nick Chubb. We were not worried about the matchup with Baltimore this week. He was a must-start, and he absolutely killed it once again this week. Dalvin Cook, another tough matchup with the Chicago Bears. He came out and outproduced a lot of people's expectations. Had him as a must-start also. Devontae Freeman, another guy, got into the double digits here this past week. Started getting involved a little bit more in the passing game. A lot of people still expecting RB1 numbers for Devontae Freeman. You didn't draft him as an RB1. Don't expect those numbers. He's returning the value of an RB2. And then Darrell Williams of the Kansas City Chiefs, another solid day, another guy that we had in the start column. He produced great numbers once again. Some of our misses. Aaron Jones was a miss for us. I did not like the matchup last week for Aaron Jones, and he kind of proved it right for the most part. 58 total yards for Aaron Jones last week. Absolutely horrible. However, the touchdown saved him, and he ended up being a miss. Same thing goes for Todd Gurley. I did not like the matchup whatsoever last week against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, a game in which he only had 16 rushing yards total. That's 16. 1-6 for Todd Gurley, but he also, with that late game passing attack to try to stay in the game there with Tampa Bay, he racked up a few receptions, got a few touchdowns, made him a miss for the week. Wayne Gallman, I expected solid numbers from Wayne Gallman. I even said in last week's video that if you didn't have a choice or you were decimated by injuries or just needed a solid starter, he's not a bad option. However, he did outperform my expectations with the touchdowns. Also, another miss. Jordan Howard, I'm pretty sure this was a miss just for about everybody. If you're out there saying that you knew that was going to happen with Jordan Howard, just admit it right now. You're a liar. But look at some of this. I mean, this goes into these numbers that we do every single week. Look at some of these weekly must-starts. Joe Mixon, Alvin Kamara, Mark Ingram, Marlon Mack. Those are guys that are going to be must-starts and going to be in the start column of these episodes almost every single week. But look who they got outperformed by last week. Tremaine Pope, Dontrell Hilliard, Raquel Armstead, and Ronald Jones. I mean, has hell frozen over? These names should not be outproducing the studs here in the must-start column. But these type of misses, they go against this percentage. They hurt us on a weekly basis. But hey, going to stay transparent and see where it takes us the rest of the week. So those were our hits and misses here for Week 4. All right, kicking off Thursday Night Football. Could be a pretty good game. Rams at Seahawks. And we're going to start both Gurley and Carson in this game. Now, I said it earlier, I did not like Todd Gurley's matchup last week. I had him as a sit last week. Well, last week he had 5 carries for 16 yards on the ground. Absolutely horrible. However, did manage to have 7 receptions, 54 yards, and 2 short touchdowns there in the game, which really made his fantasy day on paper look a lot better than it really was. What happens if Tampa Bay goes in and doesn't put up 50 points? Maybe Todd Gurley doesn't even touch those numbers. Maybe we're kind of saying, hey, what do we do with Todd Gurley instead of, hey, Todd Gurley had a great Week 4. There's a fine line there, and he's really starting to tiptoe on it. Those touchdowns really saved him. So now they go into Seattle. They're giving up, on average, 17.5 fantasy points to opposing running backs. But at least Gurley's getting the bulk of the work, right? We're not having to really worry about Malcolm Brown, so the volume should be there. If he can get somewhere near those double digits, 12, 13, 14 points this week, we're not going to hate it. He is somewhat touchdown dependent, but the touchdown upside is there at least. Now, for Chris Carson, had a huge bounce back week in Week 4, but it was against the Arizona Cardinals, who suck on defense. However, he did have 22 carries, 104 yards, added in 4 receptions, and 41 yards. Now, up until last week, though, the Rams had a pretty solid run defense. I mean, they limited Kamara and Chubb the 2 weeks prior before they kind of got, I don't even want to call it, torched by Tampa Bay. Ronald Jones looked pretty good last week. I hate to even say that. I actually feel a little dirty after saying that, but he did. He looked pretty good last week. The run defense of the Rams did not look like it did the 2 weeks prior. Biggest question, though, for me, for Chris Carson, is Rashad Penny. There's a chance he comes back this week. There's a chance that he plays. And if he does, and he eats into some of that volume of Chris Carson, some of that value could diminish here quickly. If Carson does have a fumble here in the future, loses a fumble, Rashad Penny could easily walk in here and start to get closer to a 60-40 time split between him and Carson. Carson may still remain the lead back, but Penny's on his heels as soon as he gets healthy. He can't afford to have any mistakes because Rashad Penny could take away some serious volume in this offense. Jags and Panthers here up on Sunday. This one's pretty straightforward. We got Leonard Fournette and Christian McCaffrey both as starts. Now, McCaffrey, obvious must start, right? Leading the league in rushing. Fairly difficult matchup, though, for him going up against a stout run defense of the Jacksonville Jaguars. Right now, they're giving up 14.8 points to opposing running backs, which is 8th best in the NFL. But there's nobody to take away touches from Christian McCaffrey. He's literally out there for almost 100% of their offensive snaps. The guy's involved on the ground, he's involved through the air, and could approach 1,000 rushing and 1,000 receiving here in 2019, really helping out fantasy football teams all throughout the land. He's an obvious must start. But for Leonard Fournette, we're kind of banking on the volume, and we're going to hop on that train and ride it as long as we possibly can. He may be struggling to get in the end zone, but the touchdowns will come, and the volume is going to remain to be there, especially with Gardner Minshew under center. They're going to need to take pressure off him by utilizing Fournette more and more. The Carolina Panthers giving up on average 18.3 points per game to opposing running backs, but it's all about the volume, right? He's 4th in rushing right now with Leonard Fournette, averaging 5.6 yards per carry. He has that big play potential. We've seen him break a couple big runs here in this early part of the season. Plus, he's slightly involved in the passing game, which is something he hadn't been a whole lot previously in his career, but it's really given him that safe floor on a weekly basis. The guy's going to touch the ball close to 20 times, if not more, per game. Love it. Get him in your lineup. The volume is there, and if you have a running back that's going to get that volume, he should be in your starting lineup. The reason I have Raquel Armstead here as a sit is more of a reminder. If he's available in your leagues, maybe you're in a 12-team league or larger, and this guy is available, you need to go grab him. He's already showed promise in this offense, and if anything happens to Leonard Fournette, Raquel Armstead will not only be the number 1 waiver claim that week, but the guy could actually produce RB2 numbers if he got the starting role. Don't forget about him. Put him on there as a reminder, just in case. Patriots and Redskins up next, and what do we do with Sony Michel? A lot of people were hyping up Sony Michel early in the offseason, saying this guy was going to have a monster year. Hasn't been monster as of yet. I mean, he's been almost borderline horrible for 4 weeks, even though he was a little bit better last week against the Buffalo Bills. Managed to get 63 yards, but it took him 17 carries to get it. Heck, right now, he's averaging 2.8 yards per carry, and he's not involved in the passing game whatsoever. That's a whole half a yard per carry less than Peyton Barber of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers right now, who is historically one of the least efficient running backs in all of the NFL. It's risky to start Sony Michel. However, game script plays a part here this week. Think about it. The struggling offense of the Washington Redskins, the elite defense of the New England Patriots. There's a chance that if the Patriots can get a lead, they lean on Sony Michel in the running game second half, and maybe he busts a big run or can fall into the end zone a time or two. The chance is there. It's risky. If you have better options, I'm starting better options. But right now, Sony Michel, he's risky, and he's a little bit worrisome to me to even have him in the start column. But if you have no better choices, sometimes you just got to run what you brung. Now, James White, on the other hand, was back to his pass-catching ways last week. 10 targets, 8 receptions, 57 yards, and he remains a solid PPR flex play on a weekly basis. Now, for the Redskins, going up against what is right now the number 1 run defense in the league of the New England Patriots, I mean, it's tempting maybe to throw Chris Thompson in there in a full-point PPR league if you have no better options, because they're probably going to be trailing and having to throw a lot. But at this point, I'm not risking it here. Week 5, I'm going to sit both Adrian Peterson and Chris Thompson going up against this elite defense of the New England Patriots. Bills and Titans up next, and if we're going to ride the volume train of Leonard Fournette, we're also going to ride it here of Derrick Henry. Last week, 27 carries on the ground for an even 100 yards. Didn't get the touchdown that like a lot of people were hoping for, but the touchdown upside remains there on a weekly basis. Now, he gets a matchup going up against the Buffalo Bills, a Bills defense which is easier to run against than to throw against. Don't believe me? Ask Tom Brady last week. Right now, the Bills are giving up on average 18.3 fantasy points per game to opposing running backs. I expect a heavy dose of Derrick Henry once again this week. He's going to be in the start column for me here. Now, for the Bills, it kind of really depends. What happens with Devin Singletary? Does he come back? If he does, do they both kind of cancel each other's value out? Does Devin Singletary take another week off, and does Frank Gore continue to dominate all things that Frank Gore does? I mean, this guy seems to never age. Right now, he's 11th in the NFL in rushing. last week had 17 carries and 109 yards against that number one defense of the New England Patriots. Now, albeit it was like on 2 big plays were the chunk of those yardage, but still over 100 yards again last week for Frank Gore. So this is what I'm going to do. If Singletary plays, I may fade both of these guys this week, honestly, because I don't know what kind of split they're going to get in this backfield. Now, if Devin Singletary does not play and gets ruled out, Frank Gore becomes a start for me once again in week 5. Ravens and Steelers up next, and going to have to start everybody in some form or fashion here this week in this game. Mark Ingram had himself a down week last week going up against an improved Cleveland Browns run defense. He still managed to score 8 fantasy points, but now he gets to go to Pittsburgh, where I expect a heavy dose of ground and pound on both sides of the football in this game. Right now, Mark Ingram's still 6th in the NFL in rushing and is averaging 6 yards per carry, one of the best in the NFL. So he's definitely somebody who's going to be utilized in this game and in this offense. The volume should be there. Going to start Mark Ingram once again. On the Pittsburgh side of things, though, don't forget that this Baltimore defense was just destroyed by Nick Chubb last week. And maybe you can say, yeah, that's a fluke. Well, 2 weeks ago, they were definitely taken advantage of by LaShawn McCoy and Darrell Williams. So it's not like it was just one game against the Browns. The Baltimore Ravens can be had on the ground. Now, you add all that together and add the fact that Pittsburgh is now some option-heavy, wildcat using check-down style offense. Now, all of a sudden, Jalen Samuels has himself some PPR value. He's taking direct snaps as a wildcat quarterback. He's getting, check downs left and right from Mason Rudolph involved in the passing game. This is definitely somebody that, even though James Conner is healthy, both of these guys could be utilized in this offense moving forward. It's what they need to do to take the pressure off of Mason Rudolph, especially in a game where the Baltimore Ravens are going to want to try to prove themselves a little bit more since they've had a couple bad weeks. I like both of these guys in this game. Now, it is a little bit concerning to me that even though James Conner had a great fantasy day in week 4, he's yet to have a game with over 43 rushing yards. Kind of crazy to think about. I mean, he's struggling on the ground, but the way they're utilizing him in the passing game, both these guys remain starts here in week 5. Cardinals and Bengals up next, and this is going to be a battle of 2 teams fighting to find out whose offensive line sucks the worst, because they're both horrible. But both defenses aren't much better, so we're still starting David Johnson and Joe Mixon. Neither one of these guys has seen a 100-yard rushing game yet here in 2019. However, right now, there's only one team in the NFL that gives up more fantasy points to running backs than the Cincinnati Bengals. It's the Miami Dolphins, so you definitely want to start David Johnson. Now, the defense isn't very imposing of the Arizona Cardinals either, so Joe Mixon, still a big part of this offense. Now, the Bengals are going to be without John Ross. We know A.J. Green may not be back yet, so Joe Mixon only gets a bigger portion of this offense. He's still going to be a start for me this week. Both of these guys have that potential, that upside, to have a decent fantasy day, and they're both starts for me here in week 5. Falcons and Texans up next, and the only running back I'm starting in this game is going to be Devontae Freeman. Now, there's a lot of people out there complaining with the production of Devontae Freeman through 4 weeks, but don't forget you drafted him as a RB2. Do not go out there on a weekly basis and just expect RB1 numbers. That's the reason he fell in drafts in fantasy football. That huge ceiling wasn't there on a weekly basis. However, he's still a solid starting option. As of right now, he finds himself just outside the top 24 running backs for fantasy football, and that's after having 2 difficult matchups in these last 4 games, going up once against Minnesota and Philadelphia. Now, over the last 2 games, he has 195 total yards, and he's finally getting involved in the passing game. That's where the value is for Devontae Freeman. He has 8 receptions last week alone. If they can continue to get him the ball in the passing game, that's going to help out all you fantasy owners. Now, a lot of people are thinking about, well, what about Ito Smith? He stole the touchdown last week, and he did, and that sucks. However, he's highly touchdown dependent and isn't going to see enough volume on a weekly basis to be safe enough to throw into your starting lineup. As for the Houston Texans side, Carlos Hyde and Duke Johnson, this running game as a whole is a huge mess. You can't count on consistency from either one of these guys at this point. There's just no flow to the running game here for the Houston Texans. We already know the offensive line is horrible, and they're being forced to have to throw the ball down the field, not really relying on the run game very much. In my opinion, Hyde and Duke Johnson, too risky, too inconsistent. They're both sits for me here in week 5. Bucks and Saints here, and this one could get ugly for all of the running backs in this game. This is a battle of 2 of the best run defenses in all of the NFL. I mean, right now, Tampa Bay is number 2 overall, and New Orleans is number 4 overall in the NFL. So like I said, all of these running backs involved in this game could struggle. I mean, these are 2 run defenses that last week held some of the best running backs in football to horrible games on the ground. Tampa Bay held Todd Gurley to 16 yards rushing. New Orleans held Zeke Elliott to 35 yards rushing. So let me ask you, are you comfortable starting Ronald Jones or Peyton Barber against that Saints team? I'm not really, even though Ronald Jones did look better last week. Now, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers have a better run defense up until now than the Saints do. Do we really start Alvin Kamara? Well, we kind of have to, right? I mean, he's your first-round pick. You don't sit your first-round picks in Week 5 of your fantasy football season. However, temper expectations. This one could be highly, highly risky, and if he doesn't bust a big play or fall into the end zone, it could be a bad week for Alvin Kamara. Vikings and Giants up next, and all the Dalvin Cook owners can rejoice. He's made it past the Chicago Bears matchup, and he did it all while still scoring 16 half-point PPR fantasy points for you last week. Now, he gets a matchup going up against the New York Giants, who give up on average 18 fantasy points to opposing running backs. He's the number 2 rusher in the NFL and a weekly must-start. We already know that. But what about Wayne Gallman, somebody who I missed on last week? He was saved by a couple touchdowns. However, he did have over 100 total yards, 118 total to be exact, and those 2 touchdowns. I really wanted to see what type of workload they were going to give him, though. Now, Golden Tate comes back into the mix. Is he a little bit more involved now that they'll have Tate, Shepard, and Ingram? Maybe the volume isn't quite there for Wayne Gallman. I understand that if you have him, more than likely you got him off the waiver wire. Maybe you were the Barkley owner. Maybe you had some other injuries at the running back position and you have no other options. Wayne Gallman, still a solid flex play. However, this is a very difficult matchup for him. Right now, the Minnesota Vikings are ranked 8th in the NFL for run defense, so this could be a lot tougher for him here this week than it was last week for one Wayne Gallman. Temper expectations slightly. Still a flex play, but maybe not such a high ceiling here in Week 5. Bears and Raiders up next, and I'm not overly excited about any of these running backs here in this game. I mean, the Chicago Bears come in as the number 5 rated run defense, giving up on average 13.3 fantasy points per game to opposing running backs. And Josh Jacobs still hasn't gotten involved in the passing game here in Oakland as much as he should be. Whenever they do get him the ball in the passing game, he makes things happen. The problem is he only has 3 receptions on the year. That needs to change, and until it does, this matchup really worries me for Josh Jacobs. Now, as for the Chicago backfield, it's kind of getting hard to roll any of these guys out there on a weekly basis. No more Mitch Magic, Chase Daniels under center. I mean, at least David Montgomery went out there last week and had 21 carries and really led the backfield in touches. The problem is, only had 53 yards for 2.5 yards per carry. The guy is highly inefficient, a flex play at best if you're desperate for a running back. If you have better options, I don't hate sitting David Montgomery. At some point, this guy is going to evolve in this offense and be a lot better. However, until we see that evolving happen, it's probably safer just to leave him on your bench. But like I said, no better options, need a flex play, roll the dice, put David Montgomery in as your flex play, cross your fingers, say a prayer to the fantasy gods because it could be a long day. Jets and Eagles up next, and boy is the buy low window for Le'Veon Bell getting closer and closer. Now they're coming off the bye week, and what do the owners of Le'Veon Bell get? Well, they get the run defense of the Philadelphia Eagles, one of the best in the game, allowing only 13 points to opposing running backs. Now, Le'Veon Bell, with no Sam Darnold, going into Philadelphia is a very, very huge risk. To me, this really depends on what your other options are on your team. Am I saying to sit Le'Veon Bell for Ronald Jones? No, I'm not. But it really depends what other options you have. Who did you use in your lineup last week while Bell was on a bye? That may be a possibility here this week because things aren't going to get any easier for Le'Veon Bell the next few weeks. This week, he gets the Philadelphia Eagles. After that, the Dallas Cowboys, the New England Patriots, and the Jacksonville Jaguars, some of the best run defenses in football. It's about time to buy low on Le'Veon Bell. If you're in a league where the Le'Veon Bell owner is starting to really worry or want to ditch him for something else, buy him low because his second half schedule is absolutely amazing. Somebody you want second half of the season. Now, for the Philadelphia Eagles, it's really a crapshoot, right? Whose week is it? Is it the Miles Sanders week? Is it the Jordan Howard week who was saved by 3 touchdowns last week? It's kind of hard to really say. However, game script's going to play a factor here, and the Jets give up the 11th most points to opposing running backs here on the season. Both of these guys, in my opinion, in this matchup, have flex play value. The ceiling is really limited by who gets the touchdown opportunities. And as of right now, it's not a clear-cut one or the other. It seems like it could be Jordan Howard, but it would not surprise me if it changed every other week. It's going to be really difficult to figure out this backfield. So going forward, flex plays at best for both Miles Sanders and Jordan Howard. Broncos and Chargers up next, and what week is it? It's the return of Melvin Gordon. Obvious must start once again back as the starting running back of the Los Angeles Chargers, and boy does he get a great matchup going up against the Denver Broncos, who right now are giving up on average 25.2 fantasy points per game to opposing running backs. That's fourth worst in the NFL. But what about Austin Eckler? I mean, he's played so well, and he's still going to be involved in this offense in the passing game. What happens if Mike Williams is still limited going forward? That only opens up more opportunities for them to involve Austin Eckler going forward. Don't forget, last year, 2018, he just missed 1,000 total yards, and that's with him missing 2 games in the season and also playing alongside Melvin Gordon for 12 of those games. These two have coexisted before. I don't hate it going forward. Austin Eckler remains a flex play here for me, especially in PPR leagues. Now, on the Denver side of things, I don't understand this backfield. Why is Royce Freeman getting more targets as a whole in this passing game than Phillip Lindsay? It makes no sense to me whatsoever. Phillip Lindsay seems to be controlling the work on the ground. He is the higher upside play at this point. Royce Freeman is not getting consistent volume enough or touchdown upside for him to be a start. However, the big play upside remains there for Phillip Lindsay. So as a flex play, especially in PPR leagues, I don't hate it. I just don't understand this backfield and what they're trying to accomplish in Denver. Packers and Cowboys up next, and this is not a great matchup for Aaron Jones. Heck, over the past couple weeks, he hasn't been playing that well. He's really been bailed out by a lot of goal line touchdowns. Over the last 2 weeks, he has 40 yards rushing combined in those 2 weeks, and now he gets the Dallas Cowboys defense, who is currently 6th in the NFL, giving up on average only 14.8 points to opposing running backs. Not a great matchup. What happens if the touchdowns aren't there for Aaron Jones all of a sudden? There's going to be a lot of pissed off fantasy owners if he cannot get more traction on the ground, get more efficient on the ground. They need to continue to open up that passing game. That's going to be difficult now with no Devontae Adams for a few weeks. Tough matchup for Aaron Jones. Got him as a start, but just proceed with caution and temper expectations. As for Zeke Elliott, obvious must start. However, a lot better matchup for Zeke going up against the Packers defense, who right now is 3rd worst in the NFL, giving up on average 27.6 fantasy points per game to opposing running backs. What will make a difference, though? Dallas is going to be without their starting left tackle, Tyron Smith, who's going to miss this week with a high ankle sprain. That's going to make a difference. Does that mean that you have to sit Zeke Elliott? No. It just means that those holes, those gaping holes at times that Zeke runs through, may not be there, and they may not be there for a couple weeks. Keep your fingers crossed. Hopefully Zeke Elliott can break a big one, because everybody's still waiting for that huge Zeke Elliott type of day. Colts and Chiefs up next, and this one's really going to depend on health for both sides of the football, but both of these defense, they give up on average 20-plus points to opposing running backs. So you want whichever running backs are going to play in this game. But health is going to be a concern. I mean, Marlon Mack left the Week 4 matchup with an ankle injury. His status is still unknown, something we need to pay attention to here throughout the week. Now, obviously, if he plays, he's a start. Right now, number 5 in the NFL in rushing. But for Kansas City, we really need to just wait and see like usual. This offense has proven that it can support 2 fantasy running backs. Which 2 is it going to be? Right now, LaShawn McCoy is the safest bet to be the number 1 option there. But does Damian Williams come back? Does Damian Williams sit? And does Darren Williams become more fantasy viable? Pay attention to this going into the weekend. If all 3 of these guys are active, I do believe that Damian Williams kind of goes back into that number 1/2 role with Shady McCoy. Darrell Williams back to that 3rd spot. So pay attention to it. If all of these guys are active, Damian Williams and LaShawn McCoy are my choices. Now, if Damian Williams sits, then Darrell Williams has that fantasy value, and he gets thrown right back into the starting column. Just pay attention going into the weekend. Let's find out who's healthy and who's not on both sides of the football in this one. Browns and 49ers up next, and this could be the most difficult matchup this season so far for Nick Chubb. Right now, the only reason that the San Francisco 49ers run defense isn't number 1 in the NFL is because they've only played 3 games. However, if you take into account just those 3 games, they're the number 1 rated run defense, giving up on average only 8.5 fantasy points per game to opposing running backs. But Cleveland, in order to keep winning, they need to get the ball in Nick Chubb's hands. He's already proven that he has that breakaway speed and that he can shoulder a heavy workload, 20-plus carries the past 2 weeks. This is definitely one of those games they need to establish the run early to open up the passing, to try to move the ball against the San Francisco 49ers. Another primetime game for Cleveland to come out there and try to show that they've turned the corner. Now, for San Francisco, this one is kind of a wait and see. As of right now, I have them all as sits because there's rumors coming back that Tevin Coleman could come back this week. If he does, What happens to the likes of Matt Breida and Jeff Wilson Jr. and Raheem? Not quite a must-start Mostert. I mean, they all have some type of a role, but do they all kind of eat into each other's touches to the point that none of them really have a whole lot of fantasy value? As of right now, it looked like Tevin Coleman and Matt Breida would be option 1A and 1B, but until we really see what happens in this offense and who is healthy, who is active, it's kind of hard to label any of these guys as a start. Let's see what happens going forward. Hopefully you have some better options up until now, because after this week, the backfield should be a little bit clearer, and going forward, this is definitely a piece of a backfield you want to have. Why is that? Even though they've already had their bye week last week, they are still ranked 8th in the NFL in rush attempts, even with missing a game. They're going to run the football a lot, and you want a piece of this running game. But until it really, proves more clear of who's going to be getting those touches, hang back, wait a few weeks, and let's see how it plays out, because all these guys have value once we figure out who's getting the touches. All right, those are all my running back starts and sits here for week 5 fantasy football. Maybe you agree, maybe you disagree. It's cool. We're not supposed to always agree, because if we did, there'd be no purpose with you watching this video. So make sure you put it down in the comment section. Maybe you see something differently. I'd love to debate it with you and go back and forth, trying to find the best possible options. I'm not up here telling you what to do. This is your fantasy team. We're just trying to help those game day decisions be a little bit easier. So leave me a comment down below. Hit that like button. Make sure you're subscribed if you're new to the channel. If you are, leave that comment down below. Let us know that you're new here to Headliner Nation. We would love to welcome you ourselves. But hopefully everybody has a great week here and a very successful week 5. Good luck, and we'll talk to you later.